Burmese pythons have devastated native wildlife in the Everglades.
At sunrise, the Florida Everglades shimmer like a sheet of living glass, mist curling above the water, herons standing motionless in the reeds. But on this morning, something new is stirring in the grass. Dozens of small, soft-furred shapes twitch beneath the rising sun. They look alive until you get close. Beneath the fur lies metal, circuitry, and the quiet hum of solar power. They are robotic rabbits, built not for research or rescue, but for war. For decades, Florida's wetlands have been under siege by an invader unlike any other, the Burmese python. It has devoured nearly every small mammal in its path, shattered the food web, and turned the Everglades into its own empire. Every trap, every bounty, every bullet has failed. So scientists decided to fight nature with imitation, to build prey to hunt the predator. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. Cameras hidden inside the mechanical rabbits began recording a story that blurred the line between innovation and insanity, between saving nature and rewriting it. This is the true story of Florida's most daring ecological experiment. Stay with us till the end. And don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments. Did Florida outsmart nature or awaken something it can't control? Florida unleashed a monster and nobody saw it coming. In the 1980s, sunny Florida became the playground for a booming fascination with the exotic. Neon lights, backyard pools, and curiosity drove people to seek out the extraordinary, and the pet trade delivered. Tiny creatures from halfway across the world were sold for pocket change. Glossy, patterned Burmese pythons, no bigger than a shoelace, curling harmlessly around a child's wrist. At first, they seemed harmless, even adorable. But these small, silent animals held a secret. They didn't stay small for long. Within a few years, they grew into 15 to 20-foot giants, capable of crushing deer, alligators, and anything else in their path. Many owners, overwhelmed and unprepared, released them into canals and swamps. Then, in 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida, destroying reptile facilities and sending hundreds more into the wild. Florida's paradise had become the perfect breeding ground for a predator that no one knew how to stop, and the Everglades would never be the same. They were beautiful, quiet, almost tame, and nobody thought about what would happen next, because the python, that mesmerizing, slow-blinking serpent from the jungles of Southeast Asia, doesn't stay small for long. Within just a few years, those adorable pets grew into giants stretching 15, even 20 feet long, their coils as thick as a man's leg. They ate rabbits, chickens, cats, and sometimes the patience of their owners. What began as fascination turned into fear. Families realized they could no longer feed or contain a creature that seemed to grow with every meal. So, one by one, the snakes were set free. People carried them into canals, dumped them at the edge of swamps, or whispered to neighbors that releasing them was the kind thing to do. It wasn't. Those first few releases were like seeds scattered on perfect soil. The Everglades, warm, wet, and filled with life, became a paradise for an immigrant that would never leave. Then came the storm that changed everything. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew roared across South Florida like a monster from the sea. Winds shredded homes, flattened buildings, and tore open reptile breeding facilities. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of exotic animals were flung into the wild. And among them were the pythons. For the first time, they were free not as pets, but as pioneers. What followed was quiet at first. Tourists still paddled through the glades, snapping photos of alligators and egrets, unaware of what was slithering beneath the lilies. But nature was already shifting. A few pythons became a few dozen became thousands. Hidden in the reeds, they hunted, mated, and multiplied. Each female could lay up to 100 eggs, 100 new predators ready to take their place in paradise. By the early 2000s, the signs could no longer be ignored. Hunters found deer carcasses swallowed whole. Scientists opened a python's stomach and found a bobcat inside. Cameras caught battles between snakes and alligators, nature's ancient duel playing out in the backyards of Miami. What had started as curiosity had grown into chaos. And yet, the story took another strange twist. As the python empire expanded, the government and local scientists were forced to respond. Some experiments were desperate, even controversial. In one early attempt, wildlife officers released radio-tagged rats into the wetlands, not to feed the snakes, but to track them. Each rat carried a signal, hoping to lure and locate hidden pythons. It was a risky move born from panic, and though it helped reveal a few nests, it also proved how ingenious and unstoppable the snakes had become. Florida, once known for its flamingos and sunshine, was quietly transforming into something new, a kingdom ruled by coils and silence. The Everglades' delicate balance began to crumble, and biologists whispered that the line between pet and predator had vanished forever. So how did it come to this? How did a handful of imported curiosities rewrite an entire ecosystem? The answer lies not only in biology, but in human nature itself, our endless fascination with the wild, and our inability to let it stay wild. Because sometimes the most dangerous invasions don't begin with war or disaster. They begin with wonder. Once the snakes found freedom, the Everglades changed in ways too quiet for most to notice. At first, it seemed harmless. A few more ripples in the reeds, an occasional shadow slipping beneath the sawgrass. The tourists still came, the herons still flew, and the sun still painted the sky gold at dusk. But under the water's mirror, a silent war had begun. The Burmese python, a guest from faraway jungles, had discovered paradise. Here in Florida's endless wetlands, the snake had no enemy, no tiger to stalk it, no mongoose to harass it, no disease to slow it down. It was a land without balance, and the python knew it. Each female could lay nearly 100 eggs in a single nesting season, burying them in the mud before disappearing into the reeds. By the time the sun rose again, her offspring were already spreading, invisible, unstoppable, and perfectly adapted to the new world. What happened next didn't look like a war. It looked like silence. Raccoons vanished first, then rabbits, then opossums. Researchers who had once filled notebooks with animal sightings returned to find their pages empty. Motion cameras that once recorded dozens of species now showed only one, the serpent. In some areas, scientists found a 99% drop in small mammals. It was as if an invisible hand had erased them. And then came the picture that changed everything. A single photograph that traveled the world. In 2005, biologists dissected a massive Burmese python and found the remains of a full-grown deer inside its stomach. The image was grotesque and mesmerizing. A serpent swollen with its prey, nature devouring itself in slow motion. It went viral, shocking even those who thought they'd seen it all. Florida wasn't just home to snakes anymore. It was home to monsters of its own making. But what the public didn't see was the deeper collapse. When the raccoons and rabbits disappeared, so did the predators that fed on them. Hawks, owls, and bobcats began to thin out. With fewer scavengers, carcasses lay untouched, rotting longer, changing the nutrients in the soil. Even the insects that relied on those remains began to vanish. The Everglades, once a masterpiece of delicate connections, started to come undone, thread by thread. Scientists and government biologists realized too late that this wasn't an invasion they could simply outfight. They tried everything: traps, heat sensors, and even the rat project, a desperate experiment few remember today. The plan was to release a small number of radio-tagged rats across the wetlands. Each carried a tiny signal transmitter and a scent irresistible to pythons. The idea was simple. If the snakes hunted the rats, the trackers would lead researchers straight to their hiding places and nesting grounds. It worked, but only partly. The rats led scientists to clusters of snakes deeper than anyone had imagined. They discovered hatchlings beneath tree roots, mothers guarding eggs near canal banks, and entire breeding colonies hidden beneath the mud. The Everglades was no longer an ecosystem. It was a living labyrinth of coils and scales. Still, the experiment ended almost as soon as it began. Critics called it reckless, and animal welfare groups protested, but by then the scientists had already learned the most haunting truth. The snakes were everywhere. By the late 2000s, reports flooded in from neighborhoods near Miami, even golf courses and parking lots. A giant python was spotted slithering across a bike trail. Another was found curled beneath a family's backyard deck. The invasion was no longer hidden. Florida's paradise was transforming into something eerie, beautiful on the surface, but hollow beneath. The birds still sang, but their chorus was thinner. The wind still brushed the grass, but the rustle had changed. Nature had fallen out of tune. And while officials argued about budgets and methods, the pythons just kept multiplying, patient, silent, and unseen. Because that's how invasions often happen, not with noise or fire, but with quiet, one breath at a time, one egg at a time, until one morning the world wakes up and it's already gone. By the early 2000s, Florida's secret was out. The Everglades, once a sanctuary of blue herons and whispering reeds, had become a battlefield. The enemy was silent. For a moment, it felt like a modern-day fairy tale. Man versus monster, courage versus chaos. TV crews swarmed the swamps, turning the event into reality entertainment. People watched from around the world as Florida declared open season on its slithering invaders. But when the dust settled, the numbers told a quieter story. Weeks passed, and only a few dozen pythons were caught. Scientists called it a failure. A drop in the bucket, one biologist sighed. You can't fight a flood with a spoon. Still, Florida didn't give up. Instead, it doubled down. The state introduced python elimination programs, professional bounty hunts with paid contractors who scoured the marshes by night, armed with headlamps and trucks, fitted with infrared scopes. They drove through the moonlit wetlands in search of shadows that moved. Some caught hundreds of snakes. They posed for cameras, their arms wrapped around 18-foot monsters that looked more myth than animal. But even as the trophies piled up, the population didn't shrink. That's when scientists brought in technology and a strange idea from an old experiment. Remember the radio-tagged rats once released to track snakes? That same logic returned, only this time it was weaponized. They began releasing Judas snakes. These were captured pythons, fitted with small radio transmitters, then set free again. Like the biblical name suggested, they were betrayers, leading hunters back to their hidden kind. It worked. The Judas snakes revealed massive breeding sites buried deep in the glades, tangled nests of eggs, mothers coiled around dozens of hatchlings. For a while, it seemed victory might finally be possible, but the more nests they found, the more hopeless it looked. For every snake caught, more hatched. For every swamp cleared, another filled. The Everglades, vast, wild, and forgiving, offered endless cover. Some scientists began to whisper what few dared say aloud. We can't outfight evolution. Even with modern tools, night drones, heat scanners, and satellite tracking, the war dragged on. Hunters patrolled in silence, headlights cutting across the black water. Some said they could feel the snakes watching from the shadows, learning, adapting. And while the world watched the spectacle, the photos, the headlines, the monster python trophies, something darker unfolded. The animals that once ruled the Everglades were still gone. The silence that had haunted scientists for years grew deeper. The snakes weren't just surviving, they were winning. By the late 2000s, officials quietly shifted focus. The mission was no longer eradication, it was management. In other words, the war was lost, but the battle would never end. Still, in the corners of research labs and backwoods cabins, a few refused to surrender. They began talking again about what had once been dismissed as madness: synthetic prey, decoy species, and even robotic bait. Among them was a small group led by Dr. Govett, a wildlife robotics engineer who believed that if nature couldn't stop the python, maybe technology could. And so began the next chapter in Florida's fight. Not with traps or guns, but with machines made to mimic life itself. The war had entered a new age, where invention met desperation, and every twitch of a robotic tail might be the spark of something extraordinary or catastrophic. By the time Florida's war against the pythons reached its breaking point, the swamps had gone quiet. No matter how many hunters, bounties, or Judas snakes were deployed, the invaders continued to multiply in silence. The Everglades, once a wild paradise, had become a place where nature held its breath. But then came a spark of hope. In 2016, wildlife officers introduced a new kind of soldier to the fight. Not machines, not drones, but dogs. Two specially trained Labrador retrievers named Truman and Eleanor were brought in to do what humans could not: smell the invisible. They were trained for months to recognize the faint, musky scent of python skin and shed scales. When they entered the swamp for the first time, no one expected much. The Everglades stretched across nearly 2 million acres, a green ocean of reeds and water. But to everyone's shock, the dogs found what dozens of professional hunters had missed. Within days, Truman and Eleanor uncovered pythons hidden under roots, beneath rocks, and deep in vegetation so thick it could swallow a man whole. They wagged their tails and barked triumphantly beside each find, and for a brief moment, hope returned to Florida. The news spread fast. Headlines called them the snake-sniffing heroes of the Everglades. But even heroes have limits. The dogs could only cover small areas at a time. The wetlands were simply too vast, too endless. For every snake found, 10 more escaped deeper into the marsh, bait left behind by hunters. The snakes followed the scent trail every time. This discovery sparked a controversial idea inside a small state research lab. What if they could use scent itself as a weapon? Enter Dr. Michael Govett, a wildlife engineer known for pushing ethical boundaries in the name of innovation. He proposed something bold: release live rabbits in controlled, monitored zones to lure pythons into traps. The plan was simple. The rabbits would act as natural decoys. Nearby motion sensors and heat cameras would record python movement, allowing scientists to map their behavior, predict their routes, and catch them before they bred. It wasn't meant to harm the rabbits, at least not in theory. The experiment worked astonishingly well. Pythons flocked to the areas where rabbits were placed. Within weeks, the team captured more snakes than in any previous month. But success came with a cost. When footage leaked, rabbits trembling in cages as enormous snakes approached, the public erupted. News outlets called it barbaric. Animal rights groups demanded the project's shutdown. Overnight, the research was halted, the traps dismantled, and Dr. Govett became a controversial name. But Govett didn't stop. He was haunted by what the experiment had revealed. Not the cruelty, but the potential. The snakes could be drawn by scent, by warmth, by mimicry. What if, he wondered, They could build a decoy that felt alive but wasn't. What if the prey wasn't flesh and blood, but metal and memory? That question became the seed of something extraordinary and deeply unsettling. Working late into the nights, Govett began sketching designs of small, rabbit-like prototypes covered in synthetic fur, powered by solar cells, and equipped with scent emitters. These creations were meant to look and move just like real prey. To the human eye, they would seem harmless. To a python's senses, they would be irresistible. This was no longer just wildlife management. It was the dawn of a new frontier, the birth of artificial ecology, where technology would not observe nature, but enter it. What began as a moral dilemma over live bait soon evolved into a scientific revolution, one that would blur the line between mercy and manipulation, between saving life and imitating it. And so, beneath the same Everglades sky where hurricanes once freed the first pythons decades ago, another storm was brewing. This time born not of wind and rain, but of human invention. Because in trying to outsmart nature, Dr. Govett was about to discover something chilling. Nature always plays back. After decades of failure, controversy, and painstaking experiments, Florida's fight against the Burmese python had entered a new era. From the first imported snakes in the 1980s to Hurricane Andrew's catastrophic release in 1992, the Everglades had watched in silence as these predators multiplied, reshaping the ecosystem. Attempts to track them with radio-tagged rats, Judas snakes, and even live rabbits had taught scientists one thing. The snakes could not be fooled by brute force, only by cunning. Enter Dr. Michael Govett and his team of engineers, conservationists, and biologists. They asked a daring question: what if the prey itself could become a weapon, but without using a single living creature? The answer was a marriage of biology and robotics. Over months, hidden in a small laboratory near the swamps, engineers built the first robo-rabbits. Covered in synthetic fur, shaped like the once abundant marsh rabbits, they were much more than toys. Tiny heat pads simulated the warmth of a living creature. Scent emitters released carefully calibrated musky compounds, mimicking every nuance of rabbit odor. Silent micromotors twitched the ears, giving lifelike movements in the reeds. Solar panels powered them, letting them roam for weeks in the humidity and relentless sun of the Everglades. Each robo-rabbit was also a high-tech sentinel. Cameras hidden beneath the fur, motion sensors buried in their paws, and transmitters linked to satellites allowed scientists to map every python encounter in real time. Where a live rabbit had once risked life for the experiment, now machines could both attract and observe without harm. The first deployment was quiet, almost surreal. Dozens of robotic rabbits were scattered at strategic points across the marshes at dawn. Mist hovered over the water, the sawgrass swayed like an ocean, and the Everglades held its breath. And then the snakes arrived. It began slowly, tongues flicking, eyes narrowing, bodies sliding silently over the reeds. They approached cautiously, then with growing confidence. Some circled, testing the decoys, while others struck, wrapping their massive coils around what appeared to be living prey. Cameras captured every interaction, every bite, every ripple, every hiss, fed back into the digital map, revealing hidden breeding zones, nesting grounds, and movement corridors that humans had never seen before. The results were staggering. For the first time, scientists had a living, moving network of python intelligence without putting any living rabbit at risk. The swamp, once a place where pythons ruled unseen, had become a monitored ecosystem. Every twitch of a robo-rabbit added another dot on the map, another layer of understanding of this mysterious predator. But success came at a cost. Each unit cost roughly $4,000, and survival in the swamp was no guarantee. Storms, raccoons, and curious alligators tested their durability. Scaling the program across the entire Everglades would demand millions more. Yet the psychological effect was priceless. Humans were no longer simply reacting. For the first time, they were on a fence, learning to anticipate and influence the movements of a creature that had once seemed unstoppable. Still, a haunting question remained. Had they truly outsmarted nature or merely taught it something new? Pythons are clever, patient hunters. Would they learn to detect the deception, adapt, and bypass the machines? Could innovation turn the Everglades into a chessboard where humans always move first? Or would it spark a new cycle of evolution in the shadows? As the sun rose over the wetlands, the Everglades seemed to hum, not with birdsong, but with the quiet whir of electric fur, the hidden pulse of machines blending seamlessly with nature. The marsh was alive again, but different. It was a world where technology and the wild intertwined, a living experiment that balanced hope, ethics, and a touch of danger. And as Florida held its breath, one truth became clear. In a land shaped by human mistakes and the patience of monsters, the next chapter would be written not just by nature, but by what humans dared to create.